Here are 10 reasons Israel should be very worried right now. Reason number 10 is demographics. Poll after poll show that younger generations are rabidly anti-Israel. In an Economist poll, half of 18 to 29-year-olds believe Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. According to a recent Harvard-Harris poll, 51% of 18 to 24-year-olds think the best solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict is for Israel to be ended. A lot of Zionists are shocked by these results, but the explanation is pretty simple. Younger generations get their news from social media sources like TikTok, Twitter, and Snapchat, while the older boomer generation relies on mainstream news channels which have a heavy pro Israel bias. This is why a bunch of Zionists have been freaking out, demanding that TikTok is banned. Basically, Zionists can't tolerate the existence of a platform that they can't overtly control. The upshot of all this is that Israel can expect a much greater uphill battle in getting Western populations to support its policies in the near future as these younger generations grow up. Reason number 9 Israel is extremely worried right now is international backlash. The entire non-Western world has unified against Israel. If you go down the list of countries, pretty much every non-Western nation has made a condemnatory statement against Israel, and many of them have gone so far as to accuse Israel of genocide. And you even see massive pro-Palestinian protests in places like Japan, China, Russia, and Latin America, places you'd never expect. Social media has contributed to this in two ways. One, the whole world is able to see Israel's atrocities in HD video. And two, instant translation allows the world to hear the genocidal statements coming from Israeli politicians themselves. In the past, a language barrier prevented people in Africa or South America or East Asia or even the West from understanding the Hebrew of Israel's policymakers. But now, their speeches are getting translated, and all that racism and hatred from Israel's top politicians is being instantly spread to the far corners of the globe. Reason number 8 is the undermining of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, developed by the Trump administration in 2020 with cooperation from the UAE government, was a big win for Israel because it meant opening up economic ties with surrounding Arab countries without having to commit to Palestinian statehood. But the war and all the images and videos of Palestinians being slaughtered by Israel has enraged the Muslim world to unprecedented levels. The last thing Muslims in these Gulf countries want is normalization with Israel. This puts a lot of pressure on the Gulf governments. If they proceed with normalization, they risk losing whatever last bits of legitimacy they have in the eyes of their people, and this can lead to public unrest and even instability. Is that instability worth the marginal benefit that comes with full-on normalization with the Zionist state? Before moving on with the top 10, are you subscribed to Muslim Skeptic? Most of you watching right now are not actually subscribed. Why not? If you want more in-depth videos like this, just do us a favor and subscribe to the channel. Reason number 7 Israel should be extremely worried is a recent YouGov poll showing that 36% of 18 to 29-year-olds believe that the Holocaust is exploited for political purposes. Along those lines, Raz Segal, Jewish professor of Holocaust studies at Stockton University, wrote an op-ed in The Guardian urging Benjamin Netanyahu and other Zionists to stop invoking the Holocaust in this war against Palestine. Many speculate that the increasing cynicism about the Holocaust is due to the outrageous violence Israel is committing in Gaza. To commit these atrocities and then defend them by invoking the Holocaust is not going over well with most people, and you lose your moral credibility. That's very bad news for Israel because, especially in the coming years, more people will be willing to speak out strongly against Israel and won't be deterred by being labeled Nazis. Reason number 6 Israel should be worried is Zionists are overplaying their hand. In the past few months, we have all had a front row seat in watching how the Israeli lobby leverages its power to stifle even the tiniest critique of Israel's atrocities. It's reached cartoonish levels at this point. Even people who are generally pro-Israel have been slammed for not being pro-Israel enough. A good example came from the Ivy League. As soon as October 7th happened, all the Ivy League universities announced that they were taking a stand against so-called anti-Semitism on campus. As a Harvard graduate, even I got an email from the Harvard president, Claudine Gay, that Harvard was launching an anti-Semitism advisory group. I thought to myself, why does anti-Semitism get its own advisory group at Harvard? Why not an Islamophobia advisory group, or an anti-Christian hate advisory group, or an anti-Chinese or an anti-black advisory group? Seems pretty biased. But the crazy thing was, Zionists were not even satisfied with this. Claudine Gay and other university presidents were questioned in a congressional hearing about how they would punish students who protested Israel. Gay responded that her priority was to protect Jewish students, but also allow free speech. Zionists found this unacceptable. There could be no free speech on university campuses if free speech means openly criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza. So they pressured Harvard, and they pressured until Claudine Gay had to resign. To anyone who's not a Zionist, this is all outrageous. In universities, students can protest any country in the world and face no disciplinary action. In fact, in some universities, you're encouraged to protest against even the United States. But don't you dare raise a peep against Israel. Otherwise, your student group will get suspended and you might even get expelled. So why should Israel be worried about this? In politics, subtlety is a virtue. The most powerful hand is the invisible hand. But the Israel lobby has been doing the exact opposite. Their heavy-handed approach to silencing opposition in politics and the media and on university campuses has only created mass resentment. People don't like the idea of lobbies as it undermines the ideal of democracy. So when they clearly see the work of a powerful foreign lobby manipulating their governments and universities, this breeds nothing but anger and outrage. Anger and outrage that is directed towards the Zionist state. But the alarming thing is that the Israeli lobby reacts to this increased anger and outrage by increasing censorship, which in turn increases anger and outrage. This is a vicious cycle that is simply not sustainable. Reason number 5 Israel should be worried is the open public discussion about Judaism. For decades, public criticism of religion focused on only two religions, Islam and Christianity. The leading new atheists, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, focused all their anti-God diatribes mostly on Islam, about how barbaric Islam is and how barbaric and backwards Muslims are. But these new atheists had literally nothing to say about Judaism, which is convenient given that many of these new atheists come from Jewish families or are funded by Zionists. But ever since October 7th, Judaism as a religion has been on trial and is being critiqued in an analogous way to how Islam has been critiqued in the West. What has sparked this new debate on Judaism is Israeli politicians like Netanyahu, who call the Palestinians Amalek. Many people on social media have been asking, what is Amalek and why are the Israelis calling Palestinians Amalek? This opens up a conversation about traditional Jewish laws which actually sanction genocide and even command the killing of children. This is what you will find in the Torah and in other Jewish texts. You have Israeli rabbis, you even have military officials as well as politicians who represent the religious segments of Israeli society, literally calling Palestinians subhuman animals. So many in the West are wondering, well, what does Judaism teach about non-Jews? This has opened up a conversation about traditional Jewish laws, which religiously justified apartheid policies and extreme racism. Passages of the Talmud are going viral. Video clips of traditional rabbis advocating absolutely shocking teachings of Judaism are going viral. Way too many people are Googling Metzitza B'Pah. Please, whatever you do, do not Google Metzitza B'Pah. The upshot is, since October 7th, once obscure facts about Jewish religion are now constantly being discussed on social media, and that is really bad news for Zionism. Reason number 4, boycotts have been overwhelmingly successful. In the early days of the war, McDonald's, Starbucks, and Coca-Cola offered support to the Israeli military. Immediately, they became targets of international boycotts that have caused the companies billions of dollars in losses. The boycotts have been so painful that these brands have been forced to make statements distancing themselves from Israel. Ultimately, the success of these boycotts should make Israel extremely worried because in the future, major brands will be far more hesitant to even associate with Israel, let alone to publicly endorse Israeli policy. Also, the enemies of Israel around the world have been emboldened to launch more targeted boycotts in the future to punish corporations that side with Israel. Reason number 3 Israel should be really nervous is the Red Sea blockade. Who would have thought that one of the poorest countries in the world could strike such a heavy blow to the US Israeli empire? Shipping to Israel's Red Sea port is down 85%, and if you see pictures of the port, it's like a ghost town. Now, is Israel going to man up and face the Yemenis? Of course not. Instead, like a petulant child, Israel is demanding that Big Daddy United States stop the Yemenis. The bad news for Israel is the US already tried aerial bombing in Yemen, but that only made the Yemenis more mad and more determined to target Israeli ships and now US ships as well. The US Navy has sent ships to provide protection, but they failed to actually stop the Yemeni harassment. So shipping companies are just not interested in risking their ships and their cargo and are choosing to avoid the Red Sea altogether. The military consensus is that the only way the US can really stop the Yemenis is with an all-out war, a ground invasion. But another war in the Middle East is literally the last thing the US needs right now, and even if they tried it, it would most likely end in US failure. The situation has become so desperate that the US is getting on its hands and knees to beg China to pressure Iran, to pressure the Houthis to stop the blockade. And what's funny is China's like, nah. This is what happens when you're Israel's lapdog. You will be humiliated on the international stage. But the economic woes for Israel aren't limited to the Red Sea blockade. According to the Bank of Israel, Israel is losing $600 million a week due to work absences alone. This is equal to about 6% of the weekly GDP of the entire country. And according to RAND, Israel is projected to lose $400 billion in economic activity over the next 10 years due to this war. That's a lot of shekels. And keep in mind, these are the estimates coming from Zionist institutions. The reality is probably far, far worse. Reason number 2, Israel should be extremely nervous right now, is that Israel is losing militarily in Gaza. After nearly 4 months of fighting, they have met none of their stated objectives in this war. They haven't even gotten close. And despite all the cringe TikTok videos of IDF soldiers dancing or gyrating or whatever that is, the reality is the IDF is suffering from unprecedented mental health problems and simply can't cope with the stresses of war. The Israeli media sources have been putting out video and images to give the impression that the IDF has control of northern Gaza, but the reality is far different. Independent international sources and GoPro footage directly from the front lines show that the Palestinian fighters are waging guerrilla warfare in these areas, utilizing a vast tunnel network that Israel has failed to infiltrate. What Israel doesn't seem to realize is they can't win this war through carpet bombing. This is a lesson that the US has learned time and time again, whether in Vietnam, in Iraq, or in Afghanistan. All that carpet bombing does is kill large numbers of innocent civilians, which turns public sentiment against you, both domestically and internationally. Consider the Iraq War. Bush launched the 2003 invasion of Iraq with a shock and awe bombing campaign. Shortly thereafter, he hilariously announced mission accomplished. But a long, protracted, and costly war was just getting started, a war that was deeply unpopular with the American people and the international community. The only way for Israel to wage a protracted war against Palestine is if it continues to get massive amounts of cash from the US. But already we're seeing cracks in the US's ability to keep writing blank checks for the Israeli war machine. Sooner or later, the funds will run dry, which takes us to the number one reason, and the number one reason Israel should be soiling its pampers right now is the end of US hegemony. Big Daddy is no longer going to be around to bail out baby Israel. The only reason Israel can get away with being this belligerent state that can flout all international norms whenever it pleases is because the US is there to provide cover. But those days are quickly coming to an end. Whether it's in Afghanistan or the Ukraine, the US has suffered major geostrategic losses in the past 3 years, and the situation is only getting worse. No longer can the US impose its will on the world through brute force. This is due to a combination of factors like worsening economic conditions for the US domestically and the rise of Russia and China as competing superpowers. Israel has put all of its eggs in Uncle Sam's basket, and that means the fall of the US empire spells the downfall of the Zionist entity, inshallah. I hope you've enjoyed this top 10 list as much as I have. As believers, we should always have hope and think positively no matter how dark things get. Allah says in the Quran, وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Give good news to the believers that they'll have a great bounty from Allah. Let us continue to make dua for our oppressed Palestinian brothers and sisters. Allah aid them in every way. Ameen.
فلا تهنوا وتدعوا إلى السلم